Before I begin in prayer, let me just say one thing, and I'm going to tell it to you, Siju The Dry Waadi. And I'm going to tell you because I could care less that you've left Catholicism. That doesn't bother me at all. I can still call you a brother, and I still wish the best upon you. But let me tell you one thing, my friend, and I'll call you brother. Along the ways of trying to come up with a philosophical argument that you think is clever to now get around your admitted issues when you dialogue with Unitarians and Muslims, you now have Unitarians saying that they can agree with a lot of what you're laying out. And I can tell you on my channel earlier, comments were flooded from Unitarians saying that they support what you're putting forth, and even from a few Muslims. So, Dr. Siju The Dry Waadi, it's a dangerous thesis, my friend. It is a dangerous thesis.
It's a danger of pragmatism. You're trying to be pragmatic, but that has led to damnable heresies such as even William Lane Craig denying that Genesis 1-11 is straight up history, but he articulates its mytho-history. This is the path of compromise and destruction and blasphemy and idolatry and heresy where you're going to shipwreck your faith. And point of fact, if the Lord Jesus doesn't rein you in, may he rein all of us in. I've said it, I'll say it again. You're going to end up like Stephen Nemes. What happened to him?
Yep. What happened to him is exactly what I hope does not happen to Dr. Siju The Dry Waadi. He began going down a dark path in terms of Christology, and then eventually, what did he do? He altogether denied the Trinity, and then he denied Christ as being God, and then he just left the faith altogether. Now today, he's not even a believer, and that, honestly, when you begin to think that you, as a doctor of philosophy, theology, or whatever, when you think that you're such a brainiac that you can come up with arguments that you're now seeing things that the fathers never saw, and you're coming up with arguments that the fathers wouldn't have used, you go down a dark path. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're here to uphold the biblical truth, the sacred truth that has been handed down by the faith that was taught and trained, because we know the patriarchs, we know all of the patriarchs and prophets were Trinitarians, and the biblical authors of Trinitarians. We're here to uphold that faith, period. We're not reinventing the wheel, are we, brother?
Yes, glory to the triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now, just let me, because I want him to pray, but let me read what you're saying. Isn't that the predication on all Yahweh comments? I have no idea what you're talking about. State your statement clearly, because you're inarticulate. You sound like you're just babbling. Isn't the predication that not all Yahweh comments, not referencing the? I have no idea.
I think I might know what he's referring to.
Yeah, because I don't understand what he means.
I think he's referring to the fact that Siju The Dry Waadi, shockingly, and I wish the slides brought it out, and I wish he brought it out more. Unfortunately, in the show, he doesn't bring it out more. But Siju The Dry Waadi says multiple times in many shows that the passages where Christ is identifying himself very clearly to an Old Testament passage where it is Yahweh that is speaking, he then in turn denies that Christ is the Yahweh in that Old Testament passage. I cannot fully understand why he does that or the logic. You understand? You do.
Oh, well, now let me bury that argument. That's now reading into the minds of the authors, your own assumption that they could not mean that Jesus is Yahweh by identification, but it means that Jesus is Yahweh by function, so that he functions as Yahweh. What you just did right here is you butchered the scriptures. You read into the scriptures your post-biblical metaphysical assumptions, and then assume that the writers share your assumptions, your philosophy, and that they mean Jesus is Yahweh in the way that you understand it, which begs the question and puts the cart before the horse. I don't care what you think. I want you to prove it exegetically. Jesus does the things that Yahweh does because he's Yahweh God in nature. Being precedes doing. Stop reading your metaphysical mumbo jumbo into the text, because you need to demonstrate that Paul shared your metaphysics. Peter shared your philosophical assumptions, so that when they were describing Jesus as Yahweh, they didn't mean it that he is Yahweh by identification, but functionally, because that's begging the question. You're not going to beg the question. You're going to do serious exegesis, not assume what you've yet to prove, and then butcher the Bible to agree with your assumption, because that's what Satan does. That's satanic. That's what Muslims do. That's what Unitarians do.
Brother, that's brilliant that you brought that up, and I'll make this one point and then we'll begin in prayer. Earlier today, maybe about an hour ago, there was a fantastic, phenomenal presentation by Father Anatolios. He's a Catholic scholar. In fact, he's considered one of the greatest St. Athanasius scholars on the planet. And he nearly echoed what you just said, word for word, noting that, he said, you need to realize, he said, the biblical authors and the ante-Nicene fathers were not working from a paradigm of later metaphysics where the fathers needed to clarify certain things. Rather, what they were doing was just plain and simple identifying Jesus as God. They weren't trying to work these confusing metaphysics that came up later through later controversies. It was just Jesus is Lord. That meant that he is the one true God, period. And that is something we need to stop and think about. Why do we Yes, he is. You're right, Nick. He is, and he's phenomenal. And by the way, shout out to Father Kappas. He's going to try and work his magic to help me bring him on my show, and God willing, on Sam's show as well. Father Anatolius is one of the top Nicene scholars in the planet. He is phenomenal. He's just great. So we need a lot more people like that.
Let me correct this. I don't know, Chattergirl, if you are a troll, because even your image, I don't know. You may be a demonic, demonized troll, right? Like I say, a daughter of the whore of Babylon. Perfect representation of the Father, not simply because he's in union with Yahweh. So you beg the question again. You're assuming he's not Yahweh, but he's in union with Yahweh, and therefore can be called Yahweh in that sense. No, he's the perfect representation of God the Father because he is Yahweh in nature, and therefore is all that the Father is in nature, but they're not the same person. Stop assuming your conclusion.